Okay. Got some folks here. Hello, everyone. I'm Trevor DeVal of Me, Myself, and I. Welcome to the special Valentine's Day episode of our members-only live stream. We've got some folks here already, which is fantastic. Hello, everyone. Hello. Roll rapid. Terry, you're back. Awesome. Was able to make this one. That is cool. Nigel Hobbs, I believe Nigel has just joined us in Patreon. I think you just joined us this morning, if I'm correct. I'm an antique dealer, we never retire. That could be a reference to something from earlier that I haven't seen. No, Nigel, you've been around before. You just maybe rejoined. I recognize your name, Nigel. Greetings from Catalonia. Hello. Cool. Great. We've got all kinds of folks here, which is fantastic. I'm still syncing up my live chat here to make sure I actually see everything. Len Valencia, hello. Simon, hello in Melbourne, Australia. Hello. How you going? Cool. All right. Well, thanks for everybody for joining me. It's fun to have you here. How do I jump down to, how does this work? Like this? I'm still learning, guys. Oh, 4 scroll to the bottom. There it is. Okay. Cool. All right. So you can hear me. You can see me. Yes. I always have to ask that because I'm never 100% sure. Can you hear me? See me? Touch me? Be me? Or whatever the lyrics to that musical were. Come on, tell me, folks. Tell me if you can hear me, because otherwise I'm speaking into the void. Hello from Italy. Hello, Guljos. Guljos. Okay, good. Thank you, Vortak. Thank you. You can hear me. You can see me. Awesome. All right. So, lots of cool stuff to talk about today, including whatever you guys want to talk about, because that's the whole point. But I do want to talk about or address an elephant in the room. No, there's no elephant in the room. I want to address a question I had from Adalada. Adalada. Na. Adalada. All right, where is it? Where's the question? I need to find it. Well, I can answer it. There we go. Okay, so here are 2 questions. Can you introduce the Hex March procedure from the Broken Empires and the infection rules? As far as I know, we don't have much info on these 2 topics, thanks. Yes, I can. And again, just to remind you all that this is not specifically a Broken Empires live chat stream, whatever. This is just, we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. But if you want to talk about that, we'll definitely talk about that. I do want to talk about the hex crawl system. I want to talk about travel in general because Derek over at Knights of the Last Call did a stream a little while ago about travel systems. He is very well versed in every system in the world, much as I am. And he did a whole thing about travel systems, and some of the stuff he had to say I took issue with, sort of. But I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the whole notion of travel systems in general. Whether you need them, that kind of stuff. And then if we get to it, I want to talk a little bit about just some general concepts about the OSR style of play, the old school revival or renaissance or whatever you want to call it, and some issues I have with that particular style of play. Issues I have makes it sound like I don't like it or I want everybody to stop or anything. That's not the case. But I do have some thoughts about what it means to play in an OSR game versus some other kind of game, right? And I'm not going to get into a big conversation about, oh, well, this is GNS theory or this. I'm not interested in those kind of labels. I just want to talk about some thoughts I've had on the motivating principle behind OSR play versus some other styles of play, which is something like what the Broken Empires falls into, which is not OSR. I was talking with Baron Durop the other day, and the question came up, is the Broken Empires an old school game? Is it OSR? And, you might you might be tempted to say, well, it's sort of modeled on all these old games, so yeah, there's this idea. But then again, you have to say to yourself, what does OSR mean? That's always been one of the big questions, is what does it actually mean, right? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that. But first, we're going to talk about the hex crawl system, which is not actually called a hex crawl. It is called the hex march system. Schnork. The hex march system. Let me put this over here. But before we get to that, saying hello to Scott. First time making the live chat. Love catching up on things and following the previous replays. Thanks for doing this. You are welcome, and thanks for joining us, Scott. Good to have you here. Not a question, just my observation. I'm playing a lot of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay solo these days, and I see a lot of that game in the Broken Empires. Can't wait to see the finished product. Certainly Woofrup was a big influence on the game. Weirdly, I think the biggest influence, or the version of Warhammer that was the biggest influence of the Broken Empires was 4th edition, a game I never ran. So it's weird. It was a concept of success levels and how they use them that twigged something with me, and I liked that. But then I mix that with Delta Green's blackjack system and with Mithras's special effects system, and that you get this crazy hodgepodge of a D100 game. But yeah, there is Warhammer DNA for sure. Hello, Martin Eyes. First time on the stream? Well, first time me saying welcome to it. Okay, I have a massive list of questions. That's okay. We're going to get to all of them. First, let's talk about travel. So, we're going to talk specifically about the two types of travel in the Broken Empires. But before we get to that, I want to talk about travel in general. I have long said that I believe that getting there is half the fun. One of the staples of all epic fantasy that I was raised with, like Lord of the Rings, Wheel of Time, Dragonlance, Song of Ice and Fire, Dragonbone Chair, all of these epic fantasy stories, they all have that in common. Travel, the journey, is a huge part of it. So for me, travel was always a part of my games. When I ran Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay in the first edition back in the late 80s, ran a giant empire-spanning campaign. And it was awesome. One of the best things I ever did, for a 16-year-old. But it was very much about traveling the lands and going to these hard to reach places and having all of these adventures. So it was crucial, the idea of traveling, of getting there is half the fun, of getting to the location is its own adventure. Why? Because when you travel, when you go into a setting, when you have your characters travel through a land, that is an opportunity to immerse them into the world. That is an opportunity for you as a GM to bring them into the world, to allow them to see the world as you see it, to smell the air, to hear the wind, to see the sky. That is an opportunity for you to provide atmosphere, for you to make the players feel like they're there somehow in their mind's eye. It's an opportunity for them to be able to experience the game in a totally unique way. Because if you immerse them into the world through the journey, they will feel like they've been on that journey. It's worked countless times. My players in Warhammer, they will tell you, back in those days, they will tell you that, yeah, man, we traveled the Empire and you could feel it. Now, the irony is back then, there was no real travel rules. There was no structures in place. There was nothing like that. Yeah, we knew a few things. We knew the travel rate. You're on foot? Okay, you can move X miles a day. You needed food? Yep. Which meant it became a resource game because you can only carry so much. So therefore, if you run out of food, you might have to find it. But that became part of the experience. Oh, I guess we have to hunt. No rules for that. Just, okay, let's see if you find something. Great, you find a deer. Make a ballistic skill test to bring it, whatever. And then random encounters, which were mostly fights, right? Because that was the encounter tables we had back in those days. Was what monster do you come across that you fight? So, That was what we did. There was no real structure, no real rules. I just winged it. Just winged it knowing their travel rate, their need for resource management a little bit for food, and then to see if there was any random encounters that happened on the way. I winged it. I wing it in the past tense. And it was great because I was 16. I was young. But as time went on, my desire to portray travel and to bring my characters, my players along for the ride did not diminish. In fact, it increased. But what did diminish was my appreciation of my own patterns. Because as I was running these games, as years went on, I found myself settling into familiar patterns, and I became bored with my choices. Because we are creatures of habit, and we are creatures of pattern. And if we have nothing challenging those assumptions and those patterns, we will continue to make the same choices over and over and over again. And when you do that, when you compound that over 45 years of running games, it can get really, really samey. It can start to feel really same, and you get bored of yourself. I got bored of my choices, of myself, of the things that were happening on the road were familiar to me. It was just a variation on a theme, the same thing that had been going on and 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 on, and I was bored. So what did I need? I needed a way to challenge those assumptions. I needed a structure. I needed a travel system. But the travel system wasn't just for me. It wasn't just to be able to shake things up with the interesting encounter tables that might give you a monster and a motivation for that monster. Ooh, what a thought. No, it was also about creating meaningful choices for the players along the way. They needed to be in the driver's seat. They needed to decide what route to take, how to manage their... Oh, my light's flickering. How to manage their resources. They needed a system to allow them to create meaningful choices. Why? Because when you make a meaningful choice means that there's a consequence to that choice, and that if you choose A, you cannot also choose B. That's what makes it meaningful. It is a choice, right? When you create meaningful choices for your players on the road, on the journey, you are creating tension points, and tension is the whole reason why we play these games. Doesn't matter if you're in a dungeon crawl like Shadowdark, or if you're in a big overland expedition game like The One Ring. Tension is why we play. Why? Because every dramatic instance in our history is always the same. It is a character who wants something, has to struggle against an obstacle and overcome the obstacle in order to pursue that something, that goal, dare I say. Every dramatic situation is about that, including games. I'm not saying games are stories. I'm not saying they're dramatic. I'm not saying they have a 3-act structure, nothing like that. I'm talking specifically about the qualities of drama, the qualities that keep people rooted to the table, wanting to know what's going to happen next. As a GM, you want to empower your players to make meaningful choices to create tension points, because that is memorable. There has to be consequences. If there is no system in place, the only tension points are that which the GM provides. I'm going to make something up because I want to challenge them here. That's fine until you get bored of your own choices because you've been doing it for 45 years. So a system helps with all of this. A travel system gives the GM ways to challenge their own assumptions and then break their own patterns. And it gives the players a structure to make meaningful choices within, to create more tension, to make the journey memorable. So that's a very high-level reason why I champion the travel system, right? And it doesn't even matter what the travel system is. Could be a classic hex crawl system, which have been around since time out of mind, since the earliest days of D&D. Or it could be a journey system like you see in the One Ring, or like you see in the Broken Empires. Or it could be something completely different, right? The point is, there has to be meaningful choice, and there has to be some sort of resource game. Remember, role-playing game, there is a game to this as well. Even in Traveler. In Traveler, there's not a lot of actual traveling rules, but it is entirely about the resource management, right? If you're traveling in your ship, you're completely bound by your resources. You're bound by how many parsecs you can travel. You're bound by the jump drive. You're bound by how much fuel you have. You're bound by how much supplies you have. You're bound by the monthly cost of running that ship. You're bound by trying to figure out ways to pay for that. And what does that mean? Does it mean taking on cargo? Does it mean trading? Does it mean taking on passengers? Does it mean looking for adventure sites? Does it mean taking jobs? Does it mean raiding? Does it mean any of this stuff? These are all choices that the players have to make in order to overcome their obstacles. All of them create tension points. That's good. That's all good. Now, it can be way too much, right? You can completely go overboard. And then it becomes just a series of roles with no real meaning. I saw that criticism a lot of the One Ring first edition from people who frankly didn't get it. People said, "Oh, it's just a bunch of roles. It's stupid. Travel journey system is just a bunch of roles." To which I say, you mean like combat is? 'Cause surprise, if you reduce combat to just a bunch of roles, then guess what? It's gonna suck. Yeah. If you reduce the journey system to just a bunch of rules, then it's going to suck. Don't be stupid. Right? Right? You know? Sound like Bill Burr. You know? Right? If you reduce it to just a bunch of rules, then anything is stupid. But if you use it in the spirit in which it's presented, if you use it as the opportunity that it is, which is to immerse the players, or yourself if you're solo role-playing, to have meaningful choices along the way that affects your pursuit of your goals, then it's great. Anyway, let's see. We're behind. It's funny you say that, whatever I said about 10 minutes ago. It's funny you say that since I like Mistborn, because Sanderson was like, what if I set the whole epic in one city? Right, so for me, getting there is half the fun. Travel's great. Not every story is about travel, right? Although I would submit that even an entire epic set in one city, there still is travel. You still have to get from one place to the other, which creates meaningful choices and therefore tension, right? You look at large sections of the Thieves' World series, an old series written by Robert Asprin and a bunch of other people. There's a bunch of people. There are a bunch of short stories set within one city. Not everything takes place in the city, but most of them do. There's still travel within that city. If you have to travel from the Thieves' Quarter to the Noble Quarter, but there's some cost or consequence of doing that, guess what? You got a travel system. As long as there's a meaningful choice for the players to make and some sort of risk reward or consequence or resource management or something, then you've got yourself basically a travel system, right? Are you considering possible translations for Broken Empires? If the game does well, we will look into that. Yeah, for sure. Vortex says, I like to get players to give input on what they experience to help build the long-term story, a team-building story experience. Yes, that's kind of that's a big high-level comment you've made, which is not wrong, and I don't disagree with it. But I'm very hesitant to ever use the word story, because story is a loaded word. And, maybe it's because I've been in show business my whole life, but story is a very loaded word. Story implies that there is a beginning, middle, and end, and that there is someone telling that story. That's the reason why I cannot stand the storyteller as a term for a GM. As a GM, you're not telling a story. Or when people talk about that, the story I want to tell. That's not what a game is. A game is not telling a story. A game is experiencing a story. A story can evolve and form around the events and should and will inevitably. It can't not. But if you talk about story like, I have a story I want to tell, that implies that you as the GM are telling the story, and that removes the player's agency. Now the players are just sitting back listening to, they can go see a movie if they want to do that. They can watch a TV show. That's not why they're there. They're there to experience something, to make choices. So just as you say, Vortek, when you say you want to give input on what experience to help build a long-term story, I know what you mean. And I'm not jumping down your throat or anything. I'm just very passionate about this subject. I know exactly what you mean, right? You want them to feel like they're part of the experience. I would say that you don't even need to talk about story for them to be part of the experience, as long as they have meaningful choice. If they have meaningful choices, they will be part of the experience. And the story that emerges because of that, they will, of course, be part of it. They will be the authors of it, right? They will be the ones who drove it. Been a while, says Robert Dean. Been a while since I reread the Conan stories. There's a lot of scene shifting, but not much travel, insofar as I recall. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I was thinking about that myself. So the Conan stories are just that. They're short stories. They're not novels, which means that you kind of got to cut to the chase with a short story, right? And Robert Howard did that. he cut to the chase. There was a little bit of travel, but mostly the Conan stories were about, Conan is in a tavern and hears about a thing, and then he has sex with a woman and then kills a guy with his bare hands and then winds up at the temple and takes the money or whatever. It's all very, very narrow of focus. To an extent, Elric of Melniboné by Michael Moorcock is similar. That's a series of short stories too, and he kind of shows up where he needs to do the thing. But there is still the idea of travel, and you certainly get the sense of travel. A better example by Moorcock is the Corum series. Corum is not a series of short stories. It is, in fact, a series of novels, or novellas, I guess you could technically call them. But that is very much about travel, Not about travel, but travel features prominently. Travel through time and space, in that case, and dimensions. And yes, of course, Tolkien is the OG when it comes to travel. I feel like most fantasy falls into influenced by one or the other. So you could make a case for not having a travel system. Personally, I like to have one, as you can always choose not to use it. Okay, so, yes. I'm not saying everyone has to go out and get a travel system or else you're doing it wrong. I'm not saying that. What I said was, and to repeat what I said at the beginning, when I started GMing, travel was a huge part of the game, but not a travel system. Didn't need the travel system, but the concept of travel was there. The only reason why I gravitate towards travel systems now is for the reasons I articulated, which is that it gives me more structure and it breaks my patterns, my mental patterns, and it gives the players a series of concrete, meaningful choices that are tied to their character and tied to their skills and abilities, right? The Ranger in D&D, maybe I won't say D&D because 5th edition Rangers were sort of notoriously nerfed, but the Ranger in an OSR style game, their entire purpose is to be good at stuff in the wilderness. What does that mean? It means being a guide, tracking, finding game, avoiding danger in the wilderness, all that kind of stuff. Their whole purpose is to be good in a travel system. If you don't have a system, it kind of breaks down a little bit. Or if you don't have some nod to their abilities, right? Even in Shadowdark, right? In bog standard Shadowdark, there is no real travel system. It's one page. It says, yeah, you go this way, and maybe there's an encounter, and then you get to the dungeon. Basically is what Kelsey wrote. She's got a new system coming out in her Kickstarter materials. But in the bog standard Shadowdark, because Shadowdark isn't about travel. Shadowdark's about the dungeon, right? It's a very focused game. You're at the dungeon, survive the dungeon. But the Ranger class, which she designed with, I think, some other supporters of the game, the Ranger gets advantage in all kinds of stuff about traveling. That's great. But if you don't have any opportunity to make those rolls while traveling, then it's useless, right? So there has to be some level of engagement with the core system at least, right? Otherwise, it's not meaningful. Otherwise, why do I have these abilities, right? And that's a big deal, too. The idea that if you're going to play a character, you want their abilities to matter. So if you're going to play a Ranger, you want there to be some system to engage with to use your Ranger stuff, even if that just means getting advantage on a track roll, which is an intelligence roll, stat check, right? Even if it's just that. The GM says, oh, okay, there's an encounter where they come across something weird and there's some tracks leading off in the wilderness. And the GM describes like an attack. You come across a broken down wagon and clearly there was an attack. There's blood everywhere. There's bodies everywhere. And you can see some sort of track it's hard to tell what the tracks are. Is it claws? Maybe it's claws. Maybe it's a giant booted feet. You're not exactly sure. At which point the Ranger says, can I make an intelligence check with advantage, because I'm a Ranger, to ascertain the nature of these tracks and follow them? That's a system, right? That's just engaging with the core system, but it's still engaging with the system. So, Simon, my current solo is basically a travel game. Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Oh, yes. Dragonbone Chair. If you guys haven't read the Dragonbone Chair, or Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn is the name of the trilogy. It's just a trilogy. There's only 3 books. They're big, thick books. And I guess the 3rd book was split into 2 once they republished it. But Tad Williams is the author. Fantastic, classic fantasy. So great. Lynn Abbey. Yes, thank you. That was Thieves World, one of the Thieves World authors. Okay, makes sense. Build out the adventure for all. Yeah, I know. I know what you mean. Believe me, I completely understand what you mean. The story emanates from the game. Yeah, I mean, the game is the story, right? That's an old thing. That's not my... I got to turn my fan on here. It's too hot in here. Hold on a second. Oh, terrible lights. Terrible lights. Get that off. Okay. Let's try this again here. It has been said by better men than me that the story is what happens after the session is over. The story is what happens when people sit back and look at what happened. And that's kind of true. If you let the players drive, if they are engaged in meaningful choices to overcome obstacles to pursue their goals, then at the end of the session, no matter what happened, there's a story, right? And the GM can shape events based on that. The GM can shape faction responses. The GM can shape what the NPCs are doing, what the opponents are doing. You know, one of the things I talk about in the GM section of the Broken Empires all the time is the idea that the world pushes back. So if the players are pushing on the world over here, the world pushes back over here. This is what creates a game. The players have agency. They take action. They want to achieve their goals. By doing so, they overcome those obstacles and they push on the world. And the world feels that somewhere else and pushes back over here. Now the players have to deal with that, and they push on this, and the world pushes back over here. And this is the game, right? That's the story as it is. Speaking of travel, you mentioned buying Fire and Blood on an earlier stream. Have you read the Dunk and Egg novellas? Yes. Long time ago. Still have them. They were great. And I think that largely HBO has done a masterful job on keeping true to the source material. Largely. There's a few little things that make me go, But you know what? In this day and age, the fact that anyone's paying any attention to the source material is miraculous. So I'm extraordinarily happy about that. I am finishing Fire and Blood right now, which is the history of the Targaryens. And as far as I know, what House of the Dragon is based on. The Dance of Dragons, which is the big civil war. It's good. It's good. It's Martin's a great writer. It's good stuff. It's written like a history, like a Grandmaster is describing the events. It's cool. The GM's job is to put obstacles in the PC's way for them to take choices. Yes, exactly. Exactly right. Eric, my daughter was asking me about voice acting and how to get into it. I suggested for her to start watching your channel from season 1. By the way, it's her birthday today. Well, happy birthday, Eric's daughter. Well, I'm always going to say that you should watch my show. Yes, for whatever reason. If you want to learn about voice acting, yeah, you should watch season 1 or season 2 or season 3 or season 4 because that's a big part of it. Is I play all the characters, obviously, and as a professional voice actor, I do use my voice and character voices. You know, what's interesting is that, and I may have said this before, but I totally thought when I started Me, Myself, and Die that all of my voiceover fans would immediately come over and be fans. Nope, completely different audience. They could not care less. Couldn't care less about that. Which I thought was very funny. Yeah. So it's just you. It's just you, my loyal subscribers and patrons and channel members. This good question, Robert. Meaningful choices. Do the players need to have a grasp of the rules to make their choices meaningful? That is an excellent question. The short answer is no. The short answer is all they have to know is what their character wants. But the more complex answer is, in a game that is the least bit simulationist, like, say, the Broken Empires, it sure does help to understand the systems in place so that you know what you're good at and you know the best way to approach those obstacles. In a skill-based game, if you're trying to track down an enemy through the woods, in a skill-based game, you know that certain skills are going to be helpful and certain skills are not. Track, for example, would probably be helpful when tracking down an enemy. So if your goal in that moment is to track down the enemy and you don't have the track skill, that tells you something. It tells you it's going to be a lot harder to do it. And you need to find a way, you need to make a choice to overcome that obstacle. We need to find someone with a track skill, maybe hire someone or whatever. It's still an obstacle. So it depends on the game system, and again, I go back to something like Shadow Dark. Shadow Dark's power is that you don't really need to know anything. It's so dead simple, but not so simple as to be boring, because for me, all of these super rules light games, they're just so light that I just fall asleep immediately. Shadow Dark at least is predicated on that D20 chassis, on that sort of 3rd edition, 5th edition D20 versus difficulty check, or difficulty class, whatever they call it. So it's hanging on that engine. So that engine runs. It's very simple. It's very intuitive, very easy to understand. So it's easy to make choices and not have to worry about rules. But the more rules you introduce, the more complex it's going to be, and the more the players are probably going to need to know them. So it depends, right? It depends on what you're doing. You could run everything I'm talking about, travel and all, in a game like Shadow Dark with no travel rules whatsoever. But again, if you're doing that, then there's no places for the players to engage with the system, and therefore it's just story time, right? Because if you're not rolling dice to represent the chaos and uncertainty of the world, it's just story time. And story time can be fine, but as a GM, I'm bored of story time. That's why I have systems. That's why I roll dice. I don't want to tell anybody a story. I want to experience an evolving narrative with people, but that's a really good question. That's what's so great about Broken Empires. Skill-based, so you get opportunities to use various skills to influence the overall game. Yeah, and obviously not just Broken Empires. There's many, many games that do that. Even 5e did that, right? Even 5e brought in these hard-coded skills, which, again, was ported over from 3rd edition, which was a huge departure, right? There was no real skills like that in previous editions. There was non-weapon proficiencies in late era 1st edition, which I think they codified a little bit in 2nd edition. I never actually played 2nd edition, so I can't really speak to it. But the idea of specific skills has always been there. Like if you look at 1st edition AD&D, there were skills, and the thief had all of them. Right? No one could possibly pick a lock unless you were a thief. Niche protection, class protection, which is the other reason, or one of the many reasons why I left and abandoned D&D early. It didn't make sense to me. So there was skill systems in place. They just evolved very slowly until, we have... And then, in the late 70s too, RuneQuest and Traveler came out. These were skill-based systems. So the notion of skill-based systems has been around since pretty much the very beginning. I can't take credit. Are PDFs of the Broken Empire something you can pre-order too? They will be. Yeah. We have a strategy in place for that, and there's a number of reasons for it. Essentially, once the backers get their products, once the people who have physical copies have their products, then we will make the PDF available on the store. But like I said, we have specific business reasons for doing that. But yeah, so yes, the answer is yes. Later this year. My group tried a Song of Ice and Fire RPG, which is the Game of Thrones game, for a bit, but struggled as the game went on because intrigue characters could pretty much one-shot non-intrigue characters and vice versa for combat. I don't know that system. I think I have it on PDF, and I think I gave it a quick once-over, mostly for the house rules, like the bigger political rules. So I can't really comment. I had heard that there was problems with it, and it sounds like you found those problems. But I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. I don't know if that's the case. But it wouldn't surprise me. If there's one thing I've learned over the past 3 years, you can be a GM of decades or a player of decades, having played endless amounts of systems. Hundreds in my case, and still not know how to design a game. It's very easy to think, I could do that. Come on, I know these systems backwards and forwards. How hard can it be to make one of my own that works? Well, let me tell you, my friends, a lot damn harder than it sounds. I hate the term game balance because it tends to mean something that I don't like, but what I mean when I say balanced is a game in which there are no obvious exploits. A game in which there's no obviously superior choices. Well, of course, you always use a two-handed sword in combat. There's no downside. That kind of thing. That's an unbalanced game. I don't mean, the players only ever encounter monsters equal to their CR or anything like that, or you only gain so much treasure based on your level. That's junk. I don't care about that stuff. What I care about is the system itself. Is it balanced within itself? Is it internally consistent? And are there no obvious exploits to the system? That is much harder to create than you may think. And I'll go back to Shadow Dark. Kelsey's game. When I first started to run Shadow Dark as a pleasant aside, a little palate cleanser, because it's fun, I thought, wait a minute. Are you saying that when you hit someone with the sword, you don't add your strength as damage, only to hit? That doesn't make any sense. I have to change that. From now on, of course you add your damage to strength rolls, or to your strength to damage rolls. Wreck the game. Now, you don't see why in the moment, but you make an assumption. You think, I know how games work. Come on. This is all just D&D. Come on. Of course. Clearly, Kelsey didn't know her own game. Clearly, she made an oversight when she said, no, you don't add strength to damage. No, she knows exactly what she was doing. There is all kinds of ripple effects. When you add strength to damage in Shadowdark, then you have to increase the hit point thresholds of all the monsters because they are carefully designed to be within a very particular threshold. And then you have to make sure that the monsters do more damage to the players. So you got to change that. And so the whole thing starts to ripple and buckle under that one little philosophical change. Game design is incredibly tricky, and it's very, very simple to make assumptions, and something could work on the page that's brilliant. Oh, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen, and completely fall apart when you take it to the table. Believe me, that has happened many times over the past 3 years with the Broken Empires. So many assumptions I made out of the gate. This is going to be great. This is going to be fun. Look at all these subsystems that the players are going to love. And then either the math falls down, or the players don't like it, or it becomes a chore, or it becomes something else you need to track, and it really doesn't add to the fun. It just becomes an exercise in accounting. All of that stuff you cannot know until you bring it to the table, until you see it in action. Only then does it actually make any sense. So I got off on a bit of a tangent here. The house creation rules are the best. That's from Song of Ice and Fire. I wish I could steal house creation and life paths from Burning Wheel and put into one game. Yeah, well, that's kind of what I did with Broken Empires. I took all kinds of good stuff and put them into one game. I tried solo playing a couple of times, abandoned it because I got hyper-conscious of my own restraints when having to choose risking something. Yeah, it's interesting. When you're solo role-playing, you cannot have the attitude of, I'm going into this to win, right? I'm going to win the session, win the role-playing game, which is another issue I have with OSR play, but we'll come back to that if I don't forget. When you're solo role-playing, you have to be like an author. And I mean that in a very specific sense. And I mean it like this. An author's job is to put their characters, in the book they're writing, is to put their characters through the worst possible things that they can imagine. That's their job. Their job is to have their characters endure the most grueling, awful possible challenges that you would never wish on your worst enemy. And hope that they make it through, because it is the striving to overcome the obstacle that creates drama and therefore interesting outcome. I've said this a million times and I will continue to say it. So when you're solo role-playing, you kind of have to look at your character a little bit like that. Like, I'm not out to win. I'm out... When you're solo role-playing, you kind of have to be a GM and a player at the exact same time, right? You're wearing both hats simultaneously. I'm a player. I want to make good, smart decisions for the character that I think the character would make. I want to make decisions that are in character for the character. But at the exact same time, my DM brain is firing, saying, how can I challenge this? How can I throw obstacles at this so that this character has to struggle to overcome? That's your job. So if you're afraid of risking, it's not going to work. You have to be willing to walk out your front door, Mr. Frodo, and take your first step along the road that goes ever, ever on. You have to be willing to take that risk. And if you're solo role-playing, you have to revel in the pain that your character feels. If you watch any of my seasons, you will see me reveling in the pain. And it's terrifying sometimes because I don't want them to die. But they don't. They don't die. Miraculously, somehow. But the stuff they go through. Look at Arn in season 2. My God, poor Arn. Look at all the stuff that he caused by trying to do the right thing most of the time. Brutal! But what a story at the end. What a story that emerged naturally. This goes back to what I was saying. Don't tell a story. Allow a story to emerge. Watch Season 2. Season 2, Arn had a vow. The vow was find the dragon. End the scourge of the dragon. That was it. That was the goal. Everything he did was in service to that. Yes, there were side quests, but side quests always wound up coming back to that main goal. This is your vow. This is the thing you are striving to do. It focuses play, right? It created drama because everything was about struggling to overcome obstacles to do that thing. The things I put Arn through in Season 2 were horrifying. And at the end, the story was great. The emergent story, the story that naturally emerged simply by Arn overcoming obstacles in pursuit of his goal. I cannot state this enough. Story is not a thing you impose upon the game from on high. If you do, you will railroad and you will wreck your player's agency. And sometimes it's super fun. Sometimes a railroad is great. And sometimes a GM who is really expressive and is a great storyteller and the players are on board for that can be a wonderful experience. But most of the time it sucks. Most of the time it sucks because most of the time players sit down at the table to make meaningful choices. And if there's a story imposed from on high, you cannot make meaningful choices. Those choices are made from you. Everything becomes cosmetic, becomes false choices. Because if the GM already knows what the outcome is, there's no choices for you as a player. No matter what you do, it's the Quantum Ogre. You heard of the Quantum Ogre? Right? You're in a dungeon. There's a door to the right, a door to the left. If you go and open the door to the left, there's an ogre behind it. But if you go and open the door to the right, well, the GM really wants to fight that ogre, so now the ogre is behind that door instead. Lame. Lame. Rolling dice is life, yes. Dice. Dice represent the chaos of the universe. Dice represent the butterfly effect. Dice represent all of the things that the system hasn't thought of to be all of the random little tiny features about the universe that are currently affecting your specific action in this moment. I love the dice. The dice tell the story. Or rather, they spew out data and we interpret that data and a story emerges. Is there a certain type of character that you would like to try in a possible season in the future? Like Simon was a ranger type. Do you envision a type of character you would like to try? Yeah, again, I don't like to talk about future seasons because that just makes me depressed right now because of the intense amount of work. But yeah, definitely. I've never run like a pure spell user character, and that's definitely on the agenda. I would love to do that. That would be super cool. Yeah. Didn't AD have a background skills list without any particular die rolls to use it? I think it was a board for back. Yeah, so again, from my memory of it, when Unearthed Arcana came out, they came out with non-weapon proficiencies. I think I'm remembering this right. It's been a long time. And non-weapon proficiencies were basically just skills. Skills that had nothing to do with your class or nothing to do with hitting something with a sword. Background skills particular, I don't remember that. I don't remember there being background skills anywhere in the player's handbook. Could have been buried somewhere in the DMG, maybe somewhere past the, prostitute table. But I don't know. World pushing back stuff, do you like? Do you like world pushing back stuff? Apocalypse World and Dungeon World have fronts. World and Stars Without Number have the factions. Yeah, so that is just a way of systematizing the concept of the world pushes back. When I read Stars Without Number and ran it, I loved the faction play. A, because it was a cool little game for me to play as a GM in between sessions, but more importantly for the emergent story that it produced. Every time the factions moved in the background, and sometimes the players would affect that directly, and sometimes they wouldn't, depending. But they could. Eventually, they become a faction to themselves. But the factions move. I did a video on this if you haven't seen it. It's a Sage's Library, Stars Without Number. Check it out. But the factions move in the background, and that creates a living, breathing world so that when the players come back, things have changed in the background. And especially when things have changed based specifically on what they did. That's super satisfying for them. They feel, oh my God, we had a big We made a difference in the world, you know? I did that in my One Ring campaign, too. First edition One Ring. Where the players were involved in some big stuff, man. They were influencing Bjorn and the Elven King and the Dwarves of Erebor. And they were really going out of their way to make a difference. And because that game is run in years, like you basically have an adventure, typically one per year, and then there's the whole downtime as you return home and you spend the winter and all kinds of things happen. So over the course of that year, the effects of their actions became very clear in the NPC factions, right? And it had a systemic effect. You know, I would keep, I guess, what you would call clocks from Blades in the Dark, right? Where if the player is trying to achieve a certain objective, I'm trying to ensure that the defenses of this this fortress in the mountain are going to be ready for an impending orc attack. Every season, I'm going to take some time, I'm going to take a few months, I'm going to train the guys, I'm going to help build the walls, and I'm going to make a roll. And whatever the result of that roll is going to fill in a number of ticks or sections of that clock. And once I get to a certain amount of clock numbers, it doesn't have to be a clock, it's a target number of successes, right? Once I get a certain amount of successes, it is achieved. Can I achieve that before the attack comes? That's the point of tension, right? So they would see this stuff happening in the background. Oh my God, I got to get back to the Misty Mountains. I got to help those guys build that fortress. But I can't because I've got this other hugely important thing to do over in Dale. What am I supposed to... Okay, I'll put it off for one more year. Well, 3 years go by, and guess what? The place gets wiped out by the orc attack that you could have prevented but chose not to. Tension points. Meaningful choices. That's all it does. That's all these Apocalypse World games do, is they systematize the idea that the world pushes back. And Blades of the Dark does that too. That's the reason why they have the clock system. It's just saying there's consequences to actions and there's consequences to inactivity as well. So yeah, that is exactly what I mean. The world pushes back with fronts and factions and all kinds of stuff like that. That's why a lot of people who are very critical of the Apocalypse World game saying, oh, it's a story game. I couldn't disagree more. There's not at all is that a story game. A story game is about people sitting around and telling each other stories. Apocalypse World, the dice tell the story. The results of the rolls, which are based on your choices as a player, entirely dictate the story. Now, you have a little bit of agency in terms of how to choose the specifics of the outcome, but no one knows what an Apocalypse World game is going to look like when you sit down to play it, nor should you. In fact, that's explicitly spelled out in the sort of GM chapter, right, of those games, is do not plan ahead. You must let the players drive, and the story will emerge. So it's a weird thing when I hear people say that. Oh, it's such a story game. No. Objectively wrong. Both Traveller and RuneQuest predate the AD&D DMG, which is where that was. Yeah, I mean, the AD&D DMG was just Gary's way of systematizing stuff that had been going on since 1973, 4. It was basically him going from, hey, make D&D your own game, to, wait a minute, if I make it official, then I can sell books. That was, that's what happened there. But yes, RuneQuest came out after original D&D, and so did Traveller. They came out in that time. Don't get me wrong. I think those games were hugely, what's the word? Not influential. They came up with stuff that no one had thought of before. What's the word for that? I can't think of the word. Yeah, they did stuff that no one had done before. So they're foundational games as far as I'm concerned. First DMG, P12 player character non-professional skills. So many comments. In our group, we have a saying: we need to play a game well, which means to play rules as written. Yeah, I'm a big house ruler. I think all of us are, but I always say, before you can house rule, you need to play rules as written first. You need to understand the designer's intent. You have to. Because, again, just like it's not always obvious what a rule is going to do when you're designing it, neither is it always obvious what a rule is going to do when you just read it. You don't know until you bring it to the table. The strength thing in Shadowdark is a perfect example of that. I made an assumption. Of course you add +3 to damage. And it wrecked the game. So you have to play rules as written first before you start futzing with things, even though we all start to do that. Okay, so Vortek wants to know about the solo rules. But before we get there, I do want to talk about the Hex March rules and the infection rules, which is what Adala had asked about. So I wanted a diatribe about what travel rules are all about, the reason why I have them, the reason why I use them. But let's talk about the specifics, okay? So in the Broken Empires system, there's two general methods of traveling. There's the journey system, which is highly inspired from precepts of the One Ring, mostly first edition. And then there's a hex march system. And so the journey is used for longer journeys. The journey compresses things into a more abstract period of time. The journey concerns itself with how exhausting is a trip and what things happen to you along the way. Not necessarily what fights do you get in, although that could be a thing. What events befall you along the way. Events could be anything. So you use a journey when you're going typically distance of like 10 hexes or more. There are 10-mile hexes in the game, so 100 miles or more. That's a rule of thumb. But what about if you're doing like free exploration? You want to explore into the hexes. Or if you've got a shorter distance to go. We know that there's an abandoned tower 80 miles from here, which is 8 hexes on the world map. You probably don't need to run a whole journey. You could just say, all right, you get there. But then what's the point of having journey rules? Or you could use the Hex March system. So the Hex March system is similar to the journey rules, but it has a slightly different order of operations. In the journey rules, so you've got travel roles. You've got a guide whose job it is. In the journey system, the guide's job is to get you to the next, or to get you as far as possible without taking an event, right? That's their job. Then you've got the quartermaster. The quartermaster's job is to, ensure that campsites are good, ensure that the distribution of rations is correct, all that kind of stuff. And their principal job is to ensure that the party doesn't take too much fatigue. And then there's the scout. And obviously the job of the scout is to ensure that you don't get surprised by whatever it is you find. And if you are super prepared as a scout, you might actually get bonuses or give bonuses to your party to deal with the event, whatever it is. So that's a journey, okay? In a hex march, those roles still exist, but things are slightly different. And because in the hex march, you're traveling in what we call daily time, okay? So in the game, there's 3 states of time. There's daily time, which is the stuff you do every day, where you got to worry about ration rolls at the end of the day, where time passes, where weather could be a thing. Then you've got journey time, which is that compressed, abstracted time, which could be several days at a time, depending on the quality of the rolls. And then you've got, tactical time, which is in a combat, round by round kind of stuff. So in a hex march, you still have those roles. You've still got the guide and the quartermaster and the scout, although the guide's job is slightly different in a hex march. The first thing you determine is the weather, because weather is important when you're in daily time. The specifics of the weather can change. Weather is compressed into a general descriptor in the journey system. You can get as vague or as specific with weather as you want. I have all kinds of tables in the book that tell you exactly what kind of weather per season and per location might happen, but you don't need that. All you really need to know in a hex march is it bad weather, average weather, or good weather? Because that will have an effect on the fatigue, right? So then you plan your route and the travel. Now, this is pretty easy to do because if you're on foot and you're traveling, you can only really go 2 hexes per day, or 3 if you forced march, and slightly more if you're on horseback. So planning the route is not particularly difficult. Most people plan 2 hexes. We're going to go here, we're going to take this hex, then we're going to that hex. That's a thing. But you do have to stick to that route because the way the order of operations happens. And the GM describes the journey as they go. That's very important. There's a whole step about describing the journey. And then what happens is the GM determines if there's an event that befalls the party that day. There's only a 1 in 4 chance that there is. But again, an event isn't necessarily a monster encounter. It's an event. It's something of interest. So if it does, then you determine the event. The scout makes his roll to see if you're surprised by the event or if you have some sort of advantage in the event, whatever the case is. And then once you get to your destination hex, and sometimes the event happens in your destination hex, then it's time to make your end of day rolls, starting with the fatigue roll. So the party's making camp, and now you determine your fatigue. And it's the same thing as in a journey. Fatigue is determined by the quartermaster's roll. It's also determined by the quality of the guide's roll, especially in a hex march. Because in the hex march, the guide determines At the end of the day, you see how well the guy did to see the efficiency of the track he chose. Incidentally, getting lost is not something you have to worry about because getting lost is already a separate event that can occur, right? That you can actually roll that event. But also, getting lost for me in a journey is one of the most boring things imaginable. Why? Because all it means is the players get lost, they realize they're lost, they get upset that they wasted time, they get back on the road, and they get back on track. Great. There's better ways to handle that than keeping a secret route. Oh, well, the players are actually veering off to this hex instead of this one. Won't that be fun? No, because they're going to figure out they're lost and go, God damn it. All right, let's go back. And it's just an exercise in frustration. So it's all abstracted into the system. It's assumed at some point you get a little lost. That's what the fatigue represents, as well as other things. You're taking extra fatigue because, yeah, you got lost today, so you had to double back on yourself a couple hours, and now you're more tired, right? So the end-of-day rolls, as you make the fatigue table roll, you see how well the guy did, the efficiency of his chosen route that day, the quartermaster's efficiency, and then a bunch of stuff like the terrain you're going through and whether you're mounted and, if you have enough supplies, blah, blah, blah. That's all part of that roll. And then you make the actual fatigue roll, and that determines how much fatigue is taken. And fatigue specifically in this game limits your maximum resolve. Your resolve is... I'm not going to call it a meta currency because it's not. Your resolve is your kind of inner willpower. And resolve allows you to do things like get bonuses on rolls, or if you're spellcaster, to fuel your magic, that kind of stuff. And if ever your fatigue matches your resolve, so resolve is done on a track. So let's say you have 10 resolve, which is the normal starting resolve. Whenever you spend resolve, you mark it with a single slash from left to right. Bup, bup, bup. Whenever you take fatigue, you mark it with an X from right to left. Ba-ba, ba-ba. So if ever your fatigue matches your resolve, you take a weary wound. So yeah, you can die from weariness. Probably not going to happen, but it could if things go really pear-shaped. So you do the fatigue roll, and then you do all of your normal daily rolls, which is the ration die, infection die if anyone has an infected wound, which is the next thing I'm going to talk about. The Queen's Hunt roll if there's any replaced characters. A hostile encounter, right? You set watches to make sure if there is a hostile encounter at camp that night that you can deal with it. Resolve, fatigue recovery, wound recovery the next morning, and away you go. So that's basically how it works. Sort of a high-level view. We will come back to infection, because you did ask about infection, but I want to see where we're at with the chat right now. Where are we? Oh, yeah, Vortec wants to talk about the solo rules. So, the solo rules are very close to the mythic rules. Why? Because Tana Pigeon wrote the lion's share. That's the first reason. The second reason is I love the mythic rules. So I want to use a tailored version of the mythic rules specifically for the Broken Empires. It's not the mythic rules, but it's very close. So if you are familiar with mythic, you will be familiar with this. That said, there are some specific rules that do adapt a solo character for more survivability. That is listed in the solo chapter. There's specific talents you can take that just make it a little easier, right? Because that's a thing. In a game like this, which is, sim light, simulation is light, you need to have some kind of protections like that if you're by yourself. So that's fine. I have no problem with that. I've killed more main characters when playing solo than I care to remember. That's awesome. Season 2. Amazing so much. I bought the 91 t-shirt. Awesome. We do have a store, by the way, on memyselfanddie.com. If you look for merch, it's all there. You can go and buy it. Mugs and shirts and other stuff. Dice bags. This is an interesting point. It's also a common thing that solo players are harsher on their characters than an actual GM would. Yeah, that happens a lot. In fact, that seems to be the predominant problem with solo players. It's not that they're too easy on the characters. It's that they're too hard. So the advice I always give solo players is, you want to challenge them, but give them a break, man. Like, you don't gotta try and kill them. Believe me, the world's dangerous enough. Sometimes the story your game ends up telling will be Jack London's To Build a Fire. Spoiler, the protagonist doesn't overcome all the obstacles and freezes to death. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm presuming you're joking, Robert, but I love simple survival stories. If you look at episode, I want to say 3 or 4, maybe, probably 4, of season 1 of Me, Myself, and I, it's entirely about Simon trying to survive the fact that he busted his leg up. The whole episode is about him trying to survive in the woods because he's got a busted leg. I love those stories because it's about survival. It's tension. It's, are we going to make it out of this? You don't have to have a fight with a dragon for it to be interesting and memorable. You could be fighting off infection over the course of a week, in hallucinations, in a cabin with your worst enemy, who is also suffering an infection because of the wound you caused him. This actually happened in a Hardmaster campaign I ran, and it was one of the greatest sessions ever. These 2 mortal enemies had fought in the woods, and they had wounded each other so bad, they had both taken infections. And a third party had found them and brought them to this cabin in the middle of nowhere and nursed them. But they're mortal enemies. But they can't kill each other because they're both suffering from infection and they can't even get out of bed. So it was this whole session of, like desperately trying to get this guy, but you can't even get out of bed. It was tremendous. And the whole thing, the tension point was, who's going to recover quicker and what are they going to do once they do? But of course, it was just a week of conversations and convincing each other of things. And by the end, of course, they became inseparable. They became best friends. In fact, the enemy went on to become like the principal right-hand man of the main character and then died horribly later, and it was very sad. But tension points, like that kind of survivalist stuff that's wonderful, that can all come out of stuff like that. So, you joke about just building a fire being the objective of a session, but it's absolutely true. This is the reason why I love hex crawl rules with like detailed camping stuff. I have a series of rules that I use for OSR style stuff. It works really well with Shadow Dark. It's a hex crawl. It's a series of hex crawl rules that are entirely about the choices players make on the road and the things they can choose to do to make their life easier. But it's inspired a little bit by the Dolmenwood travel system. In the Dolmenwood system, when you're on the road, you got to make a camp every night. And the quality of sleep you get will determine how well you recover. And that sleep is based on whether you have a campfire or whether you don't, or whether you have a bedroll or don't, or a tent or don't. And it's based on the season. And it's based on all kinds of stuff. So my system, my homebrew system, is a lot like that. But it also adds in things like, at the camp that night, you can perform an act of camaraderie to help people sleep better. Or you can cook up fresh rations if you've been hunting, and you can help, that might help the sleep. Or you can defend the camp. That's going to help the scout, the watch, like people taking watch. There's all these kind of things in there. And it's all designed to heighten the tension of survival day to day on the road. Now, again, not everybody plays games for that. Some people just want to get to the dungeon and hit an orc and take the gold, and that's fine. But for me, getting there is half the fun. I think that should be the name of this stream, actually. Getting there is half the fun. The system informs players through dice. Yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I would love an Ars Magica season. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. Ars Magica is a great game, but it's way too much. I couldn't even imagine a solo game in Ars Magica. That would be something. Oh, that would be something. The magic system in the Broken Empires is highly inspired by a lot of Ars Magica, so it would feel similar, although it doesn't get at all into the weeds as much as Ars Magica does. Since future seasons are a lot of work and can lead to burnout, would you maybe do one or more one-offs like the Lich game? There's a few stuff out there like cartograph skeletons that are just one session. Yes, the answer is yes. One of my big palette cleansers that I'm really looking forward to once I finish season 4 and I do all of the... I've got a bunch of tutorial videos for the Broken Empires that I have to do, which will be freely available to people. But one of the things I'm really looking forward to do is the Ranges of Shadow Deep campaign. I can't wait to play that. I love that game. And to do it on camera will be so great. It's not exactly a one-off, but super fun. Yes, Ars Magica would be interesting. Yeah, the Lich game. Lichdom is what it was called. Really cool, and I love the fact that I used it to develop the enemy for Season 4. I thought that was pretty cool, and it worked very well. Exclusi! Are the rules of Broken Empires very setting-specific? Is playing in a homebrew setting difficult or relatively easy? Yes and no. You can use the Broken Empire system in any fantasy world. The difficulty comes when you have a fantasy world that has magic, because the way magic works is very specific to the setting. Actually, I take that back. That's not necessarily true. Let's take a case study. Harn, okay? Harn is a great fantasy setting. In Harn, you have the Shekbavar. And the Shekbavar are the guild of wizards, basically. The guild of the arcane. Magic in Harn is dominated by the Shekbavar, and they have certain conceits. They have certain, I forget what the term is, but they basically, it's like schools of magic. So if you were to just take the Broken Empire system and plop it into Harn, you would have to have some sort of adjustment to fit the schools of magic to the different binds and strands which make up magic. Because magic in the Broken Empires is literally a wizard pulling at the strands of tapestry's reality and reweaving it into a shape pleasing to them. That's literally what happens. Or at least that's the philosophy behind it. The effect is I cast a spell and something happens, which is the same in any game. But if you to use the Broken Empires in Harn, you would have to adjust to the conceits of the Shekbavar magic system, or you'd have to just eject it and say, okay, the Shekbavar, they just use different styles of magic based on the system. Again, it's not hard to do. It would just be a decision point you'd have to arrive at. And if you played it in your own setting, you can do whatever you want. I think probably one of the biggest changes would be in divine magic, because divine magic in the Broken Empires is done unlike any other system I've ever seen, which is essentially the priest, the Godbound, as they're called. The Godbound has no control over the power that the god gives them. The Godbound has a skill called piety. That skill goes up and down with use. Every time they ask for a miracle or for divine intervention, they're going to use up some of their piety. But they don't know what that number is. That's a secret number. The GM knows, but they don't. There's ways that the god will tell the player if they're getting low or if they're really high, but typically speaking, the player doesn't know what their piety is. The only way to get piety back is by performing acts of service for the god. That could be a lot of things. That could be holding mass. That could be converting an unbeliever. That could be consecrating a holy place. That could be finding an artifact, going on a big journey, whatever. It could be giving a blessing. It could be doing all this stuff, but there's different amounts of piety you get back based on the quality of service you're providing for the god. What that does is it forces the priest character to be, a priest. He has to supplant his own desires for the desires of the god. The Godbound's job is to further the desires of the god, not their own. So their power is not theirs. It comes from God. And God, a.k.a. the GM, decides what happens when they invoke a miracle. Now, there's very specific guidance for that. There's different levels of miracles. There's different qualities of miracles based on the divine portfolio that the god is, overseeing. And there's all kinds of things in that chapter that help the GM adjudicate the outcome of a miracle. But it is the GM's job to adjudicate. You don't have a situation where a Godbound says, I want to cast cure light wounds on this guy. That's not how it works. The Godbound places their hands upon the wounded person and prays and invokes their god. Please, Elosia, bring down your light and spread your healing power into the wounds of this poor sinner. And then the piety roll is made, and depending on the outcome, the god either helps the Godbound or doesn't. So they have no choice. Basically, the power of a Godbound is, help me! Now, some people are going to love that. Some people are going to hate it. I love it. The players who've played Godbound in my game love it because they have power, but they have no responsibility for it. But they also can't choose. They can't say, call down a flame strike on my enemies. No, they can say, smite my enemies, please. And if they're successful, the god determines how to smite the enemies. If the god, in fact, can smite the enemies, not all of them can. All of this to say, you can use the rules, but some of the rules are more easily ported over than others. The combat rules are very easy to port over. The social rules are very easy to port over into any standard fantasy setting. But when you deal with weave magic and divine magic, there's a few little things you have to look at, but it's not insurmountable at all. For me, a story game is a game where the system focuses on advancing the story that players tell. In an RPG, the system focuses on the actions of the PC. Yes, the story that the players tell is known only through the actions of the player characters. Once the player characters have taken action, that becomes the story that we told. So you don't know what the story is until after the players have taken their actions and after the session. Only then can you look back and say, aha, this was the story about that, right? Microscope RPG is what I think is a story game. I don't know anything about Microscope. I've seen it mentioned many, many, many times. I've never looked at it. I don't know anything about it. It's just instead of the dice, it's other people taking your idea and changing it. Well, that sounds very much like a story game. That sounds like what I call a pass the stick story game, where it's a lot of yes, and then this. Yes, that's fine. It's a particular experience. It's a very specific experience. It's not one I'm hugely interested in, but a lot of people like it, and that's what matters. Hey, Gartha Jones, joining from the UK. Hello. Welcome. Thanks for joining us, yeah? Oh, wow. That's the worst accent I've ever done. Sorry. It's a bit early for me. Yeah, well. What is your final opinion on Dominion Rules? Dominion Rules was the game that I used in Season 3. It was free, so I got it after the season, and it worked okay for single roles, but combat got very confusing, and I started just taking your word for things. Yeah, so I like Dominion Rules a lot. Dominion Rules was another huge influence of the Broken Empires in terms of how it handles the philosophy of things. But Dominion Rules had one fatal flaw as far as I'm concerned. And that was, what happened in the combat was, everyone declared based on their initiative. So the faster person declared last. We see this a lot in many games, right? Where if you're super fast, that means you declare after the slow people so that you can tailor your responses based on them because they're slower, right? It's clever. Becomes a little hard to run sometimes, but it's very clever. So that's fine, though. Then the next step is, if someone wants to defend themselves, they roll their defense. So they set their target number for the defense, and then the attack happens. So mathematically, this is fine. But narratively, it's weird. Narratively, it says, I'm defending before the attack comes in, which is not how things work in a fight. So it's weird to me. I got used to it, but the order of operations is weird. And I know why the author did that. I know why he did that. And it makes sense. You know, it's not like the game's broken. It's just that particular mechanic is just always tripped me up, sort of conceptually. So in the end, yeah, I like Dominion Rules a lot. I'm so glad I used it. Would I use it again? Probably not, because everything that Dominion Rules does, Broken Empires now does in a way that I find more interesting. So I'd probably just use Broken Empires. Awesome. I use Mythic all the time. Thanks for the clarifications on the solo rules. That was some time ago. Yes, you are welcome, Vortek. Thanks for the question. All right. Adalada, you said you weren't going to be here. What about the next episode of Me, Myself, and Die? Yeah, I actually meant to shoot that this week, and I got busy because I'm writing again for a particular company, and I have a script to finish. So hopefully next week. But soon. I know I've been saying that for a long time. I tried Ars Magica 1st or 2nd edition solo years and years ago because I thought the troop-style play would help having companions, but it was very hard as it was a bit too crunchy. Yeah, Ars Magica, there's a lot... Excuse me. a lot... There's a lot going on in it. And it's great if you've got lots of minds around the table that can help track that stuff. But yeah, I think probably to do it yourself would be tough, I would imagine. I don't have too many friends back in the 80s and 90s who played and came up playing it all by myself. Yeah, well, that's... honestly, that's why a lot of people game solo, is because their friends aren't into it. Or the game they really want to run, their friends aren't into, or whatever the case is. There's many, many reasons why people do it. I'm not against the idea of it. I love Ars Magica. I think it's great, but to do it solo, that would be a lot. What I'd like to see with Ars Magica is Trevor playing with improvised magic. Yeah, well, I mean, I do that in the Broken Empires, although you hadn't really seen it in Season 4. It's not a magic-heavy season. There are other ways to improvise magic. If you look at Knave, which is Ben Milton's game, very rules light. Like, floats up into the air, it's so rules light. But one of the cool things he does in there is magic can be completely improvised just by the name of the spell. You roll randomly what the name of the spell is, and then you come up with what the spell does. I mean, that's about as rules light as it gets, guys. But it's really cool, and I would love to do that in a game. Because, I love the improvisation. I love coming up with stuff based on prompts. Love that. So who knows? Maybe I'll do a Knave game where I'll play a spellcaster. Who knows? We'll see. All right. There was a funny moment in Call of Cthulhu where we were tied up in a basement, and the vicar character was like, "Please, God, give us the strength to escape." And the DM allowed him to roll strength. See, that's interesting, that in a Call of Cthulhu game, a priest would have some sort of divine power, because one of the horrific elements of Call of Cthulhu, or at least one of the reasons why Call of Cthulhu was considered a horror genre back in the day, wasn't because of scary tentacled monsters. No, it was because, and this is my pet theory, the reason why the Cthulhu mythos was so horrific back in the day, in the 20s, was because the United States was still predominantly a Christian-based nation. Atheism wasn't a big deal, but Christianity was all the rage. And in the Cthulhu mythos, the conceit is there is no God, that humans are not special at all. We are just ants. And that these elder beings are so far beyond us, they're not hostile to us. They just don't even know we exist, and nor do they care. They think of us as we think of ants if we step on one. You don't even notice. You assume you're going to step on a few ants it doesn't even, and to the Christian mindset, that's terrifying, because Christianity centers the universe. And I don't necessarily mean modern day contemporary, like post-Vatican II Catholicism Christianity. I'm talking general Christianity as it existed for 2,000 years. Believed that humans were very special because they were made in the image of God. And they were very special, and we were the center of the universe. That's where the whole Galileo thing and Copernicus thing came about, right? The idea that we're centers of the universe. Or more Galileo than Copernicus, I guess. Huh? Whatever. Horrific. The idea that we're just nothing. That we're just nothing. That there was no afterlife, no soul, no nothing. What's the purpose? There's no purpose without God. So that's horrifying. Today, well, there's still people that believe that, obviously, a lot of them, but there's a lot of rampant atheism, you might call it. And for someone who doesn't believe in God anyway, for someone who thinks, well, yeah, of course humans are nothing special, then the horror factor of Cthulhu lessens a lot. So now it really does become about terrible creatures with tentacles that want to kill you. Because, death is still bad as an atheist. It's just the idea of there not being an afterlife is like, That's my pet theory about Cthulhu. Anyway, so if I was running a game of Call of Cthulhu and a priest character or a vicar called upon God to help, I might let him roll, but the roll's not going to do anything because there is no God in Call of Cthulhu. There's only Cthulhu and Azathoth and Nyarlathotep and the rest. So about those infections. Yes. Let's talk about infections. How I love infections in my game. All right. So here's the thing. Infections are really baked into the cake. I first encountered infection rules in Hornmaster, and I loved them because it added a level of tension. Oh, there's that term again, tension points for the players. It added a level of tension that I'd never seen before. And it did it in a way that was always terrifying. It added a level of verisimilitude. It added a level of risk to fighting people with big hunks of sharp metal that really made you think twice about combat. Not that you didn't want to get into it, but that you had to be prepared to take a wound and to have someone be able to treat that wound effectively. Not just, cure light wounds, 1d6 hit points back. No. You have to set this particular arm wound to make sure infection doesn't set in as you're traveling across the dirty forest. So infection is very much in this game. Now, there is an optional rule in this game that does say, if you don't like, in fact, I'll read it right now. This is from the Wounds, Healing, and Perils chapter. Option, no infection. If you want to make your PCs a little less susceptible to a demeaning, lingering death, choking on their own pus and sputum, ignore the infection rules. This will, however, have some ripple effects throughout the rest of the system, so be warned. So, if you don't like the infection thing, you can just cut it. But you're a pussy. In my humble opinion. So infection is important. Why? Because if a wound becomes infected, it can then become septic. And if it's septic, it's going to kill you. Going to kill you. Traveling becomes very dangerous when you're on the road because dealing with infection is way harder to do on the road. Having wounds at all, you need to make sure that there's a healer who's keeping an eye on it because it could get infected. So here's how this works, without getting too much in the weeds. Having any lethal wound points, which is any time you get attacked with a lethal weapon, if you have any lethal wound points while you are on a journey, there is a chance that that wound could become infected at some point along the way. If you're in daily time, and in daily time, every morning, you can make a recovery roll for any wounds you have, and you make them per wound. If you make a critical failure on that wound, in other words, if you roll doubles over your endurance or your recovery bonus, because each wound has a recovery bonus, which is based on the endurance, but also based on the quality of the healer that set the wound. Treated the wound. If you make a critical fail on a recovery roll, infection has set in. Has to be dealt with. You can encounter an infection event while traveling. That's an actual event where the people come across some horrible spores that go into your brain and infect you, right? That's a thing that could happen. Or certain attacks are infectious, right? There's certain like zombie attacks where they have infected claws that if they hit you those wounds could become infected. So essentially, infection is the things you have to know are how many lethal wound points do you have and what is your toughness? Because when you're on a journey, if you have any wounds at all, there's a step in the journey called check for infection. You roll a d20 plus your toughness attribute, which might be 0, against the total number of lethal wounds that you have in all locations. And if the result is equal to or less than that number, then the uninfected lethal wound with the highest wound point value becomes infected. Now, infection isn't sepsis, it's infection. Infection has to be treated, but you cannot treat infection on a journey. You have to stop and drop into daily time to do that, which comes with its own risks because of how the system works. But there is an option to do that, and there's a way to get rid of it. If you do not get rid of the infection, or if you try and fail, then the next time you roll, you're still rolling against that number, except those infected wounds. Where are we here? This is a different tab. Right. So if someone doesn't purge that infection, the threat grows greater with each passing day. The infection is more likely to fatally spread, and now you have to check for sepsis, which means you're rolling a d20 infection die plus toughness against the wound points of all infected wounds. And if the result is equal to or less than the total infected wound points, then one of them's gone septic, and now you're in real trouble. Now you got 48 hours for someone to deal with that septic wound, or else you're going to die. It's all steps, all different, increasingly difficult steps. There's many, many chances to stop the infection or to arrest the infection or to purge the infection. But if you fail, it gets worse and worse and worse. And to the point where even if a wound's gone septic and it gets treated, great. You didn't die, but your lethality level goes down by 1. Your lethality level is basically the total amount of lethal wounds you can have that over which, if you fall into shock, and your total lethal wounds are over your lethality level, now you're dying as opposed to just in shock. So it's tied in with the combat rules. Anyway, all of this to say that, there's also amputation. If you're trying to remove the sepsis but you can't, the last ditch attempt is amputation. But some things can't be amputated. If you have a wound to the skull, well, you can't really amputate your head. But you could amputate your nose, your ear, right? An eye. And there's different effects for that. So, the real question is, how often does infection come up? And the answer is more than you might think, but it's less deadly than you might think. Because in all the playtests we've done, the players know that this is a risk. So they're prepared for it. They have someone who's a healer with medical supplies just in case. And they take steps to mitigate their journey if they need to drop into daily time to do this. They know it's going to cost them time and all kinds of other things, but they know that this could happen. So they're prepared for it. So this goes back to the question somebody asked about, in travel, do the players need to understand the rules in order to make meaningful choices? Well, this is an example where the answer is yes. If you go into the wilderness and you're unaware of the risks, then you're going to be unprepared and you're going to pay the consequences. You're going to suffer the consequences. So yeah, you need to understand what you're up against. And in this case, it means you got to know what the rules are. You don't have to master them, but you have to understand this is how it works, right? So that's it. That's how infection works. Unseriously, he got a 1, which is a critical success. This is the vicar. He got a 1, which is a critical success in Call of Cthulhu because it's a percentile system where roll low is best. We were utterly astounded, but that's how we escaped. You know what? Sounds great. Sounds like it was fun. Nigel, but isn't that the same with bringing in any game systems into your main game? You have to sit down and try to work out how to do it. Oh, yeah. So the idea about can you bring Broken Empires into any setting? Yeah, that is true. Anytime you bring in any outside systems, yeah, there's going to be a conversion. Some games are a lot easier to convert than others. Like, this is one of the advantages of the OSR games, is that because they're all basically running on the same chassis, you can mix and match pretty easy with minimal conversion. Like, if you're running Shadowdark, you can use a monster from the Old School Essentials monster manual, or from the AD&D monster manual if you want. They're close enough that they'll broadly work, right? That's an advantage to the OSR stuff. Whereas in my game, it's not at all. Like, there are ways to convert, say, a Shadowdark monster into a Broken Empires creature, but it's a lot more work, right? Almost to the point where it'd be better just to take the idea of that creature and just apply Broken Empires stats to it fresh. But that's why I have a fairly sizable bestiary or monster manual in the book. I remember a threat in season 1, or thread in season 1, I think you mean, about gods being magic redirected. Is this addressed in Broken Empires or just confined to that particular story? I think I know what you're talking about. There was a thread, their story thread, in which Simon discovers something called see if I remember it here. Something called the Ascension Heresy. It wasn't called the Ascension Heresy in season 1, but it's called the Ascension Heresy now. This is the idea, and this is a heresy. It's heretical. You do not talk about this. The heretical idea that the gods are just ascended spellweavers. That in the end, when you're praying to your god, it's really not a divine being. It's just some wizard who ascended. Now, this is deeply heretical. The idea is like burn him at the stake for even suggesting it in certain places of the world. So it is addressed in the Broken Empires in that that's a real thing. The Ascension Heresy is a real thing. And there's consequences for talking about it in the wrong place. Is it true? I don't know. I guess that'll be up to you. As far as I know, there's a supplement for Ironsworn that introduces Ars Magica like magic. Oh. I would love to know what that is. That would be really cool. Can you talk about a specific god in the Broken Empires and what miracles the Godbound can do through them? Example, low level versus higher. Sure. So, I just happen to have the gods chapter open here. Let's look at Elosia. Elosia is the healer. She who mends, also known as Bruxara the Merciful, the Planter, Spring Daughter, Valora Garden Keeper. The gods have different names and faces depending where you encounter them. So Elosia is known as Elosia in Angavar, but in the Fanged Desert, she might be called Valora Garden Keeper. It's the same goddess. Or is it? So Elosia is the goddess of healing, fertility, devotion, that kind of stuff. Her domains are healing, fertility, fire, protection. Those of you who played D&D 3.5 will know the concept of domains, or even 5e, I think, still use domains. It's just a general way of saying, here's the general portfolio that the god is in charge of, right? So with Elosia, anything to do with healing or fertility or fire or protection, she's able to grant. Now, every god also has celestial servants. And those celestial servants are ways to access different domains. But each servant is like a saint, right? Each servant has a single domain. And what they do, like a saint, they petition the god on behalf of the petitioner. So they intercede on your behalf, right? The thing about celestial servants is that you can never get a greater miracle. There's lesser, moderate, or lesser, middle, and greater miracles that are possible. But with celestial servants, you can never get a greater miracle because they're just a servant. So, for example, you've got Hugh Forestborn, who is a celestial servant of Elosia, the patron of herbalists, domesticated animals, and pets. His portfolio is nature. So if you're looking to ask for help with something to do with nature, you would petition Hugh Forestborn, not Elosia herself. Which means a godbound of Elosia is never going to be able to get greater miracles when it comes to nature, but will be able to get greater miracles when it comes to healing, fertility, fire, protection. So that's the difference in the clerics, right? So let's look at nature. Let's go down to divine magic, and let's look at those portfolios here. The nature domain. So this deals with animals, wilderness, plants, and the products derived from them. Balance, change, the wilderness, summer. So for example, lesser miracles generally give you little skill bonuses. A possible lesser miracle of nature. The Godbound receives plus 20 or expertise 2. Expertise in the game is a minimum success level. So even if you only rolled 1 SL, if you had expertise 2, you succeeded with 2 SLs instead of 1. That's what expertise is. So the Godbound receives plus 20 to the skill or expertise 2 to survival, track, nature-wise. These are skills. Or another appropriate role currently being used to survive in the wilds. Which reminds me, there's a typo here. We missed that one. So that's an example of a lesser miracle of nature. Another example. The Godbound creates a small globe of sunlight in his or her hand with light equal to a torch. Lesser miracle. But a miracle it is. A middle miracle. Allows the Godbound to receive a true answer to a single question posed to the local plants or animals. The Godbound could literally ask the oak tree, who passed by here in the past week? Or whatever. Or produce food and drink equal to 1d6 ration die steps. Really handy to have that guy on the road if you run out of food. Or summon a friendly local animal of up to medium size that will help as best it can for the scene. The scene is up to the GM to determine. I have rules about that. Or have some minor immediate effect on a plant or animal, or plant or animal product. What does that mean? It's up to the GM and the player to figure that out, right? A lot of these powers are very, very, here's the parameters, just anything in this general parameter. It's highly tailored. Everybody's game is going to be different, right? And that goes for Weave Magic too. Everybody's game is going to be different because the way you interpret certain powers, that's up to you, you know? Anyway, back to the nature middle miracles. You get the idea, right? A greater miracle Restore 1d6 plus 2 fatigue to the godbound and each of her allies. That's actually much bigger than it sounds because fatigue can never be restored through weave magic, but it can be through divine magic. So is the Ascension heresy real? If the gods are nothing but ascended spellweavers, how is it that they can break the rules of magic and restore fatigue when weave magic can't do that? I don't know, figure it out. Another example of greater miracle for nature. Produce food and drink equal to 2d6 ration die steps. Summon a friendly local animal of up to huge size that will help as best it can for the scene. Change the current weather to something beneficial to the godbound situation. What does that mean? It's all context-based, right? So, general ideas. This is not a complete list. This is just some examples of the kinds of things that you can do in the nature domain and the rough levels of power. For those of you who know the game Barbarians of Lemuria, they have a great magic system, but it's very sword and sorcery, in which a sorcerer is someone, he's not casting a fireball or a magic missile. He's making a pact with a demon over the course of a month to cause a plague on a city. It's that kind of stuff. Their system is great. The tiers of the spells, I think there's 4 levels. The simplest levels are very, I curse you for a day. You're minus 10 to all your skills. Whereas the highest level is like, I cause an earthquake that swallows a city. You can do one of those in your life, typically. But it's really great because everything has a requirement, and they're really hard. Like, you can only cast this on a certain day of the year. You must sacrifice a magic item of 10,000 GP value, like all this stuff. And the more requirements you put upon the ritual, the easier it is to cast, which is a great balancing mechanic. The point is that idea is prevalent in a lot of the magic system in the Broken Empires. The idea that you really do have to adjudicate in the moment a lot of the time. Now, again, there's specific rules that deal with specific things. If you want to do an attack roll or an attack spell with weave magic, there's very specific rules on how to handle that. Because this is a game with hit locations and separate armor for different hit locations and different effects of damage on wounds and all of that stuff. So you need rules that's going to accommodate that, and they exist. But just as common, there's going to be stuff where some player says, I want to use magic to do this, and the GM looks in the book and it's not there. And it's not there because I can't think of everything. I'm just one guy. I can't think of everything every player in the world is ever going to conceive of. But there are guidelines. If the player comes up with something that isn't here or you haven't thought of, here's a general guideline on how to handle it, right? Anywho. Oh, the priest in Call of Cthulhu didn't have divine powers. It was meant to be an unserious roll for the hell of it. Oh, I see. He wouldn't have done it if he had not rolled that one. Technically, it was his own strength. Yeah. Well, that's cool, too. So he believed it was God. It wasn't God. He was just doing a strength roll. That's great. I like that. But our characters did start going to his church. That's awesome. That's emergent storytelling right there, man. That's great. That's awesome. In Broken Empires, is there the concept of corruption similar to Symbaroum? Great game. It could be the way the weave can react against a spellcaster. Yes and no. So in Symbaroum, when you cast a spell, you are at risk of corrupting yourself because magic is inherently corrosive and corrupting. It's not quite the same in the Broken Empires, although the philosophy or although the systems are similar. In the Broken Empires, every time you cast a spell, you are altering reality. And if you alter reality in such a way that reality takes notice, it's going to be much harder to control that spell. And if you don't totally control the spell, the weave will react. It's literally called a weave reaction. That could be all kinds of things. What a lot of other games would call spell fumbles is a weave reaction, except that a weave reaction doesn't nullify the outcome of your spell. If you succeeded at the spell, then you get what you want. That effect happens. But there also might be a weave reaction which introduces a complication. The worst of which, in many cases, is fraying. Fraying is that which ultimately governs a spellcaster and ultimately puts them under a finite ticking clock. The more fraying you accumulate, the closer you are to the weave plucking you out of the tapestry of reality and saying, that's enough. You've messed with us long enough. So it's similar. but it's done completely differently. But it's not corruption. Magic doesn't corrupt you. You're just trying not to gain the weed's attention. Because if you get the weed's attention, it's going to react. I assume Godbound characters can attempt to treat infections and sepsis. Well, if they have the heal skill, they certainly can, but so can anybody with the heal skill. Are you referring to a Godbound of Elosia who has the healing domain? Then yes, absolutely. That Godbound can call upon Elosia's healing to do all kinds of great things, which tend to be better than just a skill roll. In fact, I'm looking right now, the healing domain. So that cleric or that Godbound rather of Elosia is going to be very, very useful. More useful than just some healer. But do not rely on the cleric of Elosia to do your healing for you, because the god might not grant his or her wish. And then you better hope someone's got a good healing skill. But inherently, a cleric of Elosia doesn't necessarily have healing skill. Remember, this is not a class-based game. I mean, Godbound and Spellweavers are about the closest you get to a class, but it's not a class-based game. Just because you're a Godbound doesn't mean you have a certain skill in this or that thing. It's more likely you have skills in certain areas, but there's no guarantee, and you can develop your character in whatever direction you want. We could go into the real debate that a wizard powerful enough to be a god may as well be a god if we wanted to. Yep, absolutely. That's great conversation for philosophers and academics to have. And perhaps they do in your version of the Broken Empires. That's another good question. So it looks like if you wanted to be a druid, you would get that stuff by being a nature godbound. That's one version of it. But there's also a druid, which is a spellweaver. A druid... A Spellweaver Druid. Where are we here? Where's my cursor? Let's bring this up. Weave magic. No, that's not what I wanted. I wanted character creation. Here we go. Where are you, Druid? You're in here. Option. Magic convocations. When you're building a Spellweaver, you may select one of the established convocations, which just provides a combination of bind strands and stuff like that of a particular magical style. A druid is very good at change and control. And their strands are beasts, earth, plants, and water, which makes a lot of sense. So yeah, you could have a spellweaver who is a druid who can do a lot of powers that on the surface seem a lot like what a godbound of Morodan would have, who's like sort of the nature god. But they're going to have different implementations of it. Remember, spellweavers are in control of their magic. Spellweavers are about preventing the weave from noticing. Godbound have no control over their magic. It's not even called magic. It's the miracle. It's the miracle. The Godbound asks, and the god provides whatever the god chooses to be relevant in that moment. So not exactly. So nature option like enhance the plants could be used to help a farmer who's been having issues with crops. Absolutely it could. Absolutely it could. Although you might also argue that that's more of a domain of Morodan. But yeah, absolutely. The supplement I was referring to, this is the Ironsworn Ars Magica thing, right? Arcanum. You combine essences, air, earth, fire, and mind with manipulations. Conjure, change, decay, but not in Latin. Yeah, well, that sounds very similar. And Barbarians of Lemuria has 3 spell magnitudes. Oh, I thought there was 4. Okay, 3. 3 it is. Weave reactions are similar to the paradox spirit reactions from Mage. You talked to this point before. Love that magic concept. Yeah, that was another huge influence. Remember, too, that, like Broken Empires is unapologetically borrowing from scores of different games. That's a feature, not a bug. That's, like some jackass said, yeah, it looks like you're just stealing all these other games. That's a moronic statement. I am doing what every single game designer has ever done, which is stand on the shoulders of the giants who came before me and derive inspiration from that which has come before. Every single game does that. It's moronic to, there's you can't copyright game mechanics. So there's no stealing involved. Even if I was to absolutely 100% pluck a game mechanic from one particular game and then just reproduce it, you know what I'd have? I'd have the OSR. Because that's what the OSR is, just variations of D&D. D20, class, level, hit points, a bazillion versions of that. So I guess everyone in the OSR is a thief too, huh? Jackass? Idiots. I like the idea you said to create a Godbound the way you like. So you could make a War Priest-style Godbound that is great in combat skills, but has certain other Godbound abilities. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely you could. The piety is similar to faith in Burning Wheel, too. Although that dice pool doesn't run out, you just almost never succeed. Yeah, that is true. So speaking of the OSR, I wanted to talk about this. I mentioned this at the beginning. But I do want to talk about this a little bit. It's probably going to be an unpopular take. I've been looking a lot at the OSR stuff lately. And here's the thing. One of the defining principles that most people would agree are a defining principle for the OSR is that your character doesn't exist on your character sheet. It's about player skill, not character skill. So I understand this idea. I understand this concept. I understand the thinking behind it. Here's why I don't like that. If I'm playing a character, I want the character, I want their particular statistics or skills or whatever, their class, I want that to matter in more than just how easy is it for me to hit an orc with a sword. A lot of OSR play only mechanizes combat, sometimes exploration in terms of timing and random encounters and resource expenditure. But when it comes to thinking your way around a trap or searching a room, or here's a classic example. The OSR mentality says that players go in a room, they don't roll a search roll. That's so 5e. No, what they do is they specifically describe how they're searching the room. And if they happen to describe searching in the one particular corner where the secret door is, then they just find it. That's one example. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Let me repreface this by saying there's nothing wrong with any of these styles of play. I'm not a one true wayist. If you are having fun playing your game in whatever way you want, great, continue. What I am saying, though, is that the only way to judge other methods of playing is by actually playing them first, but I'll come to that. So, the idea, OSR play, that it's player skill, not character skill. Here's why I don't like that. If I'm in a situation in the OSR, and it's player skill, in other words, if I, Trevor, am being clever as a player, then I'm outthinking Gary the GM. That's really what's going on here. I'm outthinking him. And even if I'm not outthinking him, I'm still using my smarts, my charisma, my ability to describe something or to make a speech or to whatever. It's me. It's Trevor doing that. Not the character. Classic example as well. I'm giving a passion speech to the Lord to allow us through his land. I, Trevor, am a very, very inspirational player, and I'm well-spoken, and I'm very charismatic, and at the table I play this character, and it's basically just me. I'm just being me. I'm being very inspirational, and everybody goes, wow, and the GM says, yeah, that's great, what you said, great. The Lord allows you across the land. And I think I didn't earn that victory. I mean, I did. The player did, but the character didn't. The character had a charisma bonus of -4, and I didn't even have to roll it. How is that role-playing? How is that playing anything other than just an extension of me? And why on earth would I want to spend 40 years playing an extension of me? How goddamn boring that is. The OSR play, you are a player. And you are thinking your way through the dungeon. You roll stuff for combat, sure. You roll some stuff that represents your character physically, how easy it is to hit. But you are the one outsmarting the traps. You are the one outsmarting. Okay, great. But do that for 40 years. and you realize how bored you become. I want to role play. I want to play a character different than me. Player skill over character skill. By this point, I am a 20th level player, even if I'm playing a first level character, which means I know all the tricks. I know all the tricks of the dungeons. I know the tricks of GMs. I can see it coming a mile away. I'm never surprised, ever, because I am an experienced 20th level player. There's no difference in the characters I play. They're all just avatars of me. Oh yeah, one casts spells and one hits things with swords and one picks locks, but they're all just me. How goddamn dull that is. Now, if you are an old grognard that has been playing this way for 50 years and you love it, bravo, congratulations. I wish you the best, and I'm jealous of you. You play however you want to play, that's great. But if you're that same grognard who criticizes any other way of playing while you have never played that way, then you don't know what you're talking about, my friend. You have no idea what you're saying. If you have only ever played this way, I encourage you to try something else. I encourage you to play by a system, play with a system that allows you to play the character, in which your role-playing triggers the skill. You play something, and the character's skill carries the day with that dice roll. Not you, the character. Once you play that way, then you'll know that there's another way of playing. There's many other ways of playing. Now, you don't have to like it. In fact, you could hate it, and that's fine. But at least once you pull yourself out of that bubble, you're able to recognize other ways of playing the game. And that gives you perspective, and that gives you wisdom. That gives you knowledge. It gives you a leg to stand on when you're having these kind of discussions. There's nothing that I hate more than one true way is when people saying, this is the way to play, and that is it. I think it's colossally ignorant. I think it's a colossal self-own, and I think these people are doing themselves a disservice when they do that. They're walling themselves off in their walls of ignorance. This is the way to do things. I never want to live like that. I want to see all the ways of doing things. Now, there's a lot of bad ways of doing things, but I tried them. I've tried them. I've tried the story games. I've tried OSR. I've tried huge simulation. I tried all that stuff. And what I found, for me, winds up at a particular place. But that's irrelevant. It doesn't matter what I like. What matters is what you like. But I just am encouraging you. This is the only reason why I bring this up. I'm encouraging you to seek out different experiences. It can only elevate your game experience. It can only elevate it. Because even if you don't like that new way of playing, it'll change something in your perspective. You'll see the game slightly differently now. And it'll open up opportunities to play in a slightly different way. Give you new experiences and not just play the same extension of yourself in D&D avatar form over and over and over again. So that is my biggest problem with the whole concept of that player skill over character skill thing. Again, I get it. I know why they say that. And it's awesome if you're a new player. It's awesome because your eyes are wide with wonder at the experience of playing a game and going through a dungeon. But I've been doing this for 45 years. There's no more wonder in going through a dungeon. I know what's going to happen in that dungeon. I see the traps coming. I know the monsters. I see it. I cannot be surprised. If I am surprised, it'd be amazing. But I haven't been surprised in years. Years. So what's left for me? What's left for me is playing a character. Dare I say, role-playing a character. All right. Rant over. Let's see. Stealing from one source is plagiarism. Stealing from multiple sources is research. George R. Martin. Absolutely. Absolutely. I've heard that as doctoral thesis. This is something that came up before, and I've forgotten. Role-playing triggers the skill. A system with moves, and you have to role-play to use these moves. Not the same thing. Not the same thing. What I mean by the role-playing triggers a skill, it's actually specific to the Broken Empires in this case, but it doesn't have to be. In a skill-based game, where you're playing a character who has skills, and this is really about social skills more than anything else, which is a big point of contention with a lot of gamers. How can you possibly have a social encounter system? That doesn't make sense. That's stupid. We just roleplay. Fine. You do whatever you want. But I like systems that challenge my assumptions, which is what I said at the very beginning of this stream. I like things to shake things up and to break my patterns. A system allows me to do that. Creates a new experience, a heightened and elevated experience. So in a social encounter, the players are engaged. Hopefully in first person, they're saying I, me, but it doesn't have to be. If they could be authorial stance, my character says this, my character says that. It doesn't matter. The players are engaged with the NPC, with what's going on. Why are they engaged? They're engaged because they're pursuing goals. It's important to them. There's stakes, all of the stuff that's crucial for player engagement. They have to care, right? And there's all kinds of stuff I have in the game that helps GMs create situations in which will foster the idea that players will care about their characters and what the characters are trying to achieve. So presuming that the players actually care about the outcome of events for their characters, I don't know why they're playing if they don't. Presuming they care, they're in a council with an important NPC, and they desperately need that NPC to grant them access to something. It doesn't matter what it is. The point is, they need to change this guy's mind. They need to convince him of something. They need to get something from it, whatever it is. The only way to do it is through engaging him socially. Should they just make a charisma roll and a d20? Sometimes the answer is yes. But only if there's no stakes involved. You don't always bust out a social encounter system. It's not necessary. It's only interesting when the players are pursuing specific goals and their particular use of skills becomes a little tactical minigame that does not separate you from the role-playing. It enhances it. So, they're in this council with this lord. They need the lord to do a thing. One of the players says, "My lord, we beseech you, allow us through your land in order to do X and Y and Z and blah, 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 blah." As soon as he opens his mouth, the encounter starts. There's no initiative. There's no rounds, nothing like that. It's just as soon as he says something, this begins the encounter. The GM is playing the NPC, listens to what that character said. And as a GM, the GM adjudicates, based on what was said, what that appropriate skill is. Sounds like persuade to me. Actually, the way you said it, it sounds like protocol. Sounds like you're addressing the Lord in the manner of the court. You're being very proper. That's a protocol skill. Now, the player hopefully understands by this point what having a protocol skill means, and they have a shared understanding around the table because they've learned the game about what kind of statements and approaches involve the protocol skill as opposed to the persuade or the wit or the deceive or the intimidate. So the character has chosen to play his character in such a way as to portray this protocol use. The player has done that. But it is the character that rolls the skill. If that character does not have a good protocol skill, then the character is going to probably fail. It is not the player's latent charisma that carries the day here. It is the character skill that changes events. But that skill can only be chosen or rolled if the player engages it. The role-playing triggers the skill. So it is not make a move. Make a persuade move, make a charisma move, and there's specific results based on the move. Not that I'm mocking that. The Apocalypse games are fun, super fun. But that is a crucial distinction. And I have run social encounters this way for years. And it all started with the One Ring, the first edition One Ring, where they had this idea. Now, it wasn't as involved as mine. It was super simple. But the idea was, it was kind of a takeoff on the 4th edition skill challenge system, with a much maligned 4th edition skill challenge system. But that's basically all it was. It was saying every character has a tolerance. The tolerance in that system meant you can only fail 3 times before the audience is over. And your job is to accumulate successes. Skill challenge. Except that it's a social thing. So the skills you're using are social skills. Each character is going to have a different score and different social skills. There are different ways of doing things. It's not just roll charisma. No, because you can be better at persuasion than you can at protocol, than you can at wit, than you can at intimidate, than you can at deceive, than you can at seduction. There are different ways than you can at perform. Like, there's many ways to approach the situation. But the player has to embody that approach in order to trigger the skill. This, to me, was a revelation when I discovered it, and I liked it so much that I built upon it, and I created my own social encounter system, which then became the Broken Empire's social encounter system. Now, it's not always necessary. It's only important where there's stakes. You don't use this when you're talking to a bartender to ask him if he's heard about any jobs lately. You don't use this if you're trying to bribe the gate guard to get inside the building. I mean, you can, but it's really overkill, right? You could just make a persuade check or intimidate or not even check. The GM is just free to say, all right, what do you say to him? Well, I say to him, if he doesn't get out of the way, I'm going to smash him in the face because I'm a big tough guy. And the GM can go, yeah, okay, you are a big tough guy. Right, he lets you in. Guess what? You're the GM. You're the game master. You're the master of the game. You can choose to run the game however you want. Ironically, I came from Powered by the Apocalypse, and you taught me that the grittier games can be lots of fun too. So you don't think Powered by the Apocalypse is a gritty game? Is that what I might be misunderstanding you? Because to me, those games can be super gritty, especially the original the original Apocalypse world. Woo! Well, I am the 50-year-old grognard. Welcome. But I would agree with your assessment of player skill. It ends up being more of a competitive game between players and GM than an exploration of the world. Well said, Robert. I agree. And I can hear the fingers clicking in the comments. How dare you say this? You're completely wrong. You are wrong. Fine. Well, I don't care. You want to think I'm wrong? Go ahead, make your arguments. Go ahead. Make your arguments in the comments below. I've never seen an argument to dispute this. I've never seen an argument that was sufficient to convince me otherwise. So if you have the argument to convince me otherwise, be my guest. Go ahead. Write it. I would love to be wrong. I would love to learn something new. I would rather be correct than right. But I am both correct and right in this case. Well said. It ends up being more of a competitive game between players and GM than an exploration of the world. It ends up being a game of how can I manipulate the GM into getting what I want? How can I, the player, manipulate the GM, the other human being at the table, into getting what I want? And not necessarily maliciously. Presumably you're all friends. But you're still doing that. You're manipulating the GM. Had a conversation with my friend Jared about this the other night. That was his biggest criticism of the OSR too. It's a game of Mother May I, basically. And these guys are the same ones to criticize story games for being games of Mother May I. But that's all that level of play is. That's what player skill over character skill ultimately winds up being. Mother May I. If you're not using the system, if you're not engaging with the rules, with the game, then that's all it is. Best rant ever. Yeah, it went on a bit. I think I probably bitched and complained for half an hour. I'm not trying to piss anybody off here. I'm really not. But I will. Because it's the internet. I just feel strongly about it. I just feel strongly that if you want to criticize a style of play, you're more than welcome. But boy, you better be able to back it up. And so many of these complaints I've seen from these people, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. They just don't like it because it's different. It's not how I do it. Try something else, then criticize. I have played the OSR style for years. I know what I'm talking about. But whatever. You think what you will. Agree, disagree, don't care. The player skill route is more fun the first time than later, yeah. And it is fun. It's super fun the first few times. It's you feel invigorated. You feel like you're there, you know? And then that goes away. And it becomes the same old pattern over and over and over again. The PFS Organized Pathfinder Society, organized play we run at times. We often rule over the systematic and procedural way they do the modules and encourage creative ways to approach the situation. Well, that's great. I mean, you do whatever you want to do at your table, right? You do whatever you are the game master. You do what you think is best for your table. And that's a big responsibility. Because a lot of people say the GM is just another player. Not true. The GM is not just another player. The GM has overwhelming responsibility. The GM's job is to try and facilitate all of these other minds and creative forces at the table so that everybody's having a good time. That's hard to do a lot of the time. Does it help if the players are also contributing? Yes, of course it does. And there's different levels of that, you know. I spend a story point to say that this new thing happens in the scene. A lot of games do that for just that reason. They want the players to be engaged creatively. I think that's terrible, but that's just my opinion. I get why they do it. I understand. You, as the game master, it is your job. It is your job to facilitate the table. Not to bend over backwards, not to say yes to everything. No, to facilitate the creative forces at the table. To ensure that everybody feels like they can contribute in their way. And that's going to be different for everybody. You know, if you've got a really quiet player who sits back and doesn't like to say anything, the job of the GM at that point is to find a way to help them contribute in a way that's comfortable for them and a way that's fun for them, right? So it's part therapist. Being a GM is part, you got to be a psychologist in a way. Because it's about understanding, it's as much about understanding the psyche of people as it is understanding rules, you know? Yeah, my D&D character has high deception but no persuasion. So instead of being my logical and impassioned self, I have to figure out how I can lie to this person so I can roll deception. Yeah, and that's fun because it forces you out of your comfort zone. Believe me, I've seen it so many times at my tables where that exact situation where people go, God, I really want to lie to him, but my deceive sucks. I guess I have to try and persuade him? Oh, God. How am I going to do this? I'm no good at that. Well, try. Whatever you say, it will trigger the skill. And again, that doesn't mean if you're trying to inspire the person, because your character's got a great inspire, you do not have to deliver a rousing, inspiring speech. Again, it's the character that's doing it. You just have to approach it in the right way. So, yes, if you are an actor stance person and you want to make a rousing, inspiring speech that's awesome that you wrote out a few minutes before and you stand up at the table and now you're LARPing and I hate that, but if you're to stand up and do the thing and rousing speech, oh my God, it's great. Clearly roll and inspire. But it doesn't have to be that. It could be, my character stands and stares at the Lord and tells him with great passion and vigor that unless he allows us through, surely the daughter that he has, his last daughter, will never come to know her own glory. But if I say to him, if you want her to come into her own, we can help with that. Allow us across your land, I say. It's all basically third person. I have a hard time doing third person because I'm a first person guy, but you know what I mean? Great. Roll inspire. The role-playing triggers the skill. Maybe it's anecdotal. I played with people that were too timid to engage, but wanted a diplomat. The GM was smart enough to ask them sometimes intention, and others just let them roll. Yeah, that's really important. That's so important. Especially with characters, or players, I should say, that are a little timid and a little unsure. It's very simple. The GM just has to say to them, okay, let me make sure I got this straight. What is your intention with this? That's crucial. So if the guy if he's really trying to be inspiring because his character's got a great inspire score, but the player, is having a hard time coming up with the right words. Well, my player says some really inspiring things to try and inspire him. Okay, well, I think he'd probably have to do a little better than that. But even a kind-hearted GM could say, okay, all right, that's fine. Roll inspire. At that point, you're really not role-playing, though. You're just sort of saying my character does this. But hey, everybody's built differently. Everybody has different strengths. That's perfectly fine. I would have no problem with that. But if there's a question where he says something where the GM isn't quite sure, that could be inspire, could be persuade. Maybe it's even intimidate. It's hard to tell. All the GM has to do is ask the question, okay, let me get your intention. What is it exactly you're intending to achieve here? And they'll tell you. Well, I'm trying to inspire him. Oh, okay. Well, then, yeah, I'm going to default to Inspire. The social encounter game is not a gotcha game. Ha ha! You said this, but I think it's actually that. So screw you. You roll your shit skill. No, it's not. It's not that. It's not. If you're doing it that way, you're doing it wrong. It's not a gotcha game. It's just designed to focus the players onto role-playing their characters to the best of their ability, to take advantage of their character skill, so that they're not just avatars, projecting themselves, playing themselves, which would be OSR. I probably meant a different word to grittier. Oh, I meant roll to see which arm you get hit on and whether or not you lose it or not. Right. In Burning Wheel, you choose the skill you use in the Duel of Wits, and then you role-play the use of that skill. It's similar to what you said, but the other way around, isn't it? Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought this up. Burning Wheel is one of those games which I think was just an incredible innovation. The things that Luke did in that game, Luke Crane, truly innovative. And a lot of it doesn't work. For me, I can't. There's lots of people that love it. But for me, in every playtest I've ever done as a player or a GM with Burning Wheel, the Duel of Wits system is one of those things that's great on paper but falls apart at the table, in my experience. Because it's predicated, because it goes against how people actually talk. The Duel of Wits system says you plan 3 moves ahead. You plan 3 different ways of approaching the statement ahead of time. And then you roll each and you compare. But that's not how an argument happens. That's not how people argue. I mean, maybe in the most formal settings of an actual formal debate. Yes, I come to the podium, I make my first statements, my opening statements, then my opponent makes the statements, and then we rebut. But that's not how most of these encounters happen. These encounters happen with, I need you to do this thing, and I'm going to get what I want from you. And when people are having an argument or a discussion or whatever, they say what they say, and then the person on the other side responds. That's how humans do it. They don't plan 3 steps ahead and damn the torpedoes. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say that, then I'm going to say this. So you say the first thing, and the guy says something you didn't expect, and now, oh, well, I guess you're locked into the second and third thing, and yes, I know there's rules for changing it, but it just becomes about playing rules rather than role-playing the moment. So I don't like the Duel of Wits system in execution. Again, I think it's great conceptually. I think it was a massive innovation because it was trying to bring a new level of tension building to a social encounter. And I 100% applaud Luke Crane for that. He was trying to create a new type of conflict, which wasn't about smashing someone with the sword, but felt as tactical. I just think that my system works better for that. But there's going to be people who say this Burning Empires, that was his other game. This Broken Empire system is totally broken. The social encounter doesn't work at all. It's terrible. Okay, sure. If it doesn't work for you, that's fine. It's not going to work for everybody. But it works for us. And it works for everybody who's ever tested the game. So far, until it doesn't. Anyway, whatever. Yeah, so Duel of Wits, interesting, but not quite my bag. The level of GM versus players does depend on the GM. Some GMs run their games to lessen that competitiveness. Not that it goes away completely, but it does vary by GM. Absolutely, Terry. You're absolutely right. And this is why it's impossible to have blanket statements. This is why it's impossible to have one true wayism. This is why it's impossible to say, this is the way you must play and no other. It's impossible to say that. And as passionate as I am and as ranty as I get about things I'm passionate about, I'm not right for every table. My beliefs and systems are not right for every table at all. And if this really doesn't jive with you, that's okay. Just ignore it. You don't need to use it. Who cares? Even if it's the Broken Empires and you find stuff in there that you don't like, don't use it. Don't use it. It's fine. I'm not going to come to your house and say, hey, are you playing this right? So yeah, everybody's different and everybody has different strengths. And as a GM, you have to learn those strengths. And as a player, you have to learn those strengths. I am a terrible player, I think. And I'll tell you why. I, Terry, and the rest of you, am overly competitive as a player. I don't like to lose. And that comes from years of player skill over character skill. That comes from years of an OSR style where I am in the dungeon now. And I need to beat the monster. And I need to win. It was never about the character. It was never about the experience of that. It was never about role-playing. No, it was me, my ego. And that awful habit has stuck with me all these years. And as much as I try to break out of it, it's still hiding in the background. And the only way that I can break out of it is by engaging in systems that allow the character to come forward, by role-playing someone different than myself. One of my favorite characters ever was in a D&D 5e game, believe it or not. A friend of mine, Riley, back in LA, was running it. Great GM. And I was playing with a bunch of new players. People had very little experience. So I said to him, I know my bad habits. My bad habits are, I always emerge as the leader. I typically play like the paladin, the knight, the charismatic guy, and I emerge as a leader because I'm good at that. I do not want to be the leader. I want these new players to have that experience for themselves. I want them to stumble and learn from it. I just want to sit back and support. So I specifically played a character. He was technically a cleric, but his whole thing was he was a cartographer. He was a dwarven cartographer. His whole thing was he was there to map the area for his kingdom back home. That was it. That was it. And he was this old gruff guy. And yeah, he could fight, and yeah, he could cast spells, but I specifically held back. And when we would be in a situation, a complicated choice would arise, and the rest of the players would look at me because they knew that I knew what to do. I, Trevor, the level 20 player, knew what to do, but my third level cleric sure didn't know what to do. And so, much to my credit, I said in character, I have no idea. This one's on you. And I let them figure it out. And by God, we lived or died by their choices. That was my gift to them. To give them as much agency as possible. But that was the only time I was a really good player. Otherwise, I'm a terrible player. I'm very selfish. and I'm just I need to win. Terrible. I hate that. Anyway. In solo gaming, having to remove yourself as GM or player is key. Having skills and dice decide to play is where it's at. Yep, couldn't agree more, man. It can be hard to teach a new player to play the character, not themselves. But that is part of the job as GM. Yes, agreed, 100%. And that's why, like, again, the OSR style of player skill instead of character skill, that's why it works well with new players. They've got enough to worry about. Like I said, their eyes are wide with wonder. They can't be, you don't want to just say, hey, character, hey, look at your sheet, hey, what's your skill value? Hey, eyes down here, eyes down here. You don't want to do that to them. You want them to have the experience that we all had at the beginning, right? You want that. So let them, right? As I said, OSR style play is great when you're a new player. Let them. But you are right. It is an elevated, almost advanced level of play. To play someone who is different than yourself, to start to think like someone who's different than yourself, and to allow the character to come forward based on what the sheet says. Yes, you're not just playing numbers. Those numbers mean something. Those numbers represent features that are different from you in many cases. I don't know if I could play Burning Wheel in person, but I really enjoyed it with the virtual tabletop, automatically ticking the checks off for you when you click roll. I'm sure you did. And I'm glad you enjoyed it. That's why I don't like virtual tabletop experiences as much, because you're not actually playing the game, the computer is. Part of the experience of Burning Wheel is learning how to track. It's learning how to be an accountant when you're tracking how many skills did I fail and make and the checks and stuff. And it sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but that's part of the experience. Part of the experience is learning how the systems work so you can internalize them so you are playing the game. Not the VTT. I cannot stand the VTT that, oh, it's great. Like with Pathfinder in Foundry. Oh, it's great. You just select the character you want to attack, and you click attack, and it does everything for you. Well, I'm not playing the game then, because I'm not understanding the systems. The computer's playing the game. Why don't I just go play Skyrim then? Honestly, that's my feeling on it. I hate that shit. But I see why people love it, because they have no attention span, and they don't want to learn anything. How would you solo it if you had to? Burning Wheel? I wouldn't. Absolutely agree on your take on DOW. Duel of Wits. Good. I'm glad. Great good player story. It's true. It's true. I might have to do that since I'm usually the one coming up with the cunning plans that usually seem to work. Traveler, as mentioned before, is the ultimate game of accountancy. It sure is. And you know what? There's people that love that. I love the idea of it. I love it as a GM, but I don't think I'd love it as a player. So I ran a Traveler campaign last year. Very brief. We basically did the first chapter of the Pirates of Drinax, and it was fun. But half the players, there was 5 players, half of them loved the accounting aspect of Traveler. They loved figuring out exactly how much tonnage they had left for cargo. They loved trying to barter for the right price. They loved figuring out if we took it to this system, we're going to make a bigger profit than here. They loved figuring out how much fuel they needed. They loved, what's our monthly expenses to pay the crew and how they loved that stuff. And the other half was like, oh God, when can we just shoot something? So different strokes, But it sure is the ultimate game of accountancy, and you got to be into it, because if you're not, boy, you're going to be bored out of your mind. Well, I've been babbling for 2.5 hours almost. Said a lot of things today. A lot of things a lot of people aren't going to like when this goes on YouTube. But it is the truth. I speak the truth. Not my truth. There's no such thing as my truth. The truth. Truth is objective. Objective reality. It's what's for dinner. I'm going to call it here, guys. Thank you, all of you, for joining me this afternoon. So great to have so many of you here. It's so great to talk to you and have these conversations. I love this. I love the fact that I'm doing this now. Just as a reminder, if you're not a member or a YouTube member or a D10 or higher patron, you can consider joining us and be part of this thing, and then I can yell at you too, but in real time instead of just after the screen is, or after the stream is done. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to once again find the right button to end this broadcast. All right, friends, I will see you again. My next stream is going to be next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Central, so join me then.